Hello and welcome to the audio commentary track for Parallels Melancholy Music from Chrono Cross. I'm Dan, aka TPR, and yeah, just going to chat for about an hour about this Chrono Cross tribute album that I recorded late last year and released on the 31st of January 2020. So I've always wanted to do an audio commentary track, and it's a bit weird, I must admit, just chatting to my computer, watching the recording waveforms just go slowly across the screen while I'm talking to absolutely no one in particular. But I thought it might be a nice opportunity to chat about recording process, like playing Chrono Cross, like the parallels between this album and the Chrono Trigger album. While also, just chatting about music in general. What really annoys me is that a lot of bands do audio commentaries, but it's only like for a minute per track. And these are bands that have written original songs, so is your song that uninteresting that you can only talk about it for a minute? Then, well, is it worth talking about at all? So hopefully, I'm going to be able to keep talking for 62 minutes, and hopefully, very hopefully, you'll hear something at least slightly interesting about the album. So what's going to happen, I'll do a 3, 2, 1, and then I'll press play for people who are downloading this separate audio track. But on the YouTube version, you'll hear the music in the background. Okay, so 3, 2, 1, play. And away we go. So this is obviously track 1, and even more obviously, it's Scars of Time, Chrono Cross, because, it couldn't have really been anything else, could it? But the first thing to note is that the intro pad I used back then is very similar to the one used in the original. It's from Spectrasonic's Omnisphere, and I think it's a preset called Ice Caves. But regardless, I heard it while arranging something else entirely, like a couple of years ago, and realised, I need to remember that just in case I ever do a Chrono Cross album. So sometimes it can be hard to figure out what should be the first track on one of these tribute albums. Obviously not on this one, but on the other ones. It's either a track heard early on in the game, like Awakening on the World of Ruin tribute, but sometimes it's also my favourite track from the album, one that sets that melancholy tone the best. I think the best example of that is the Genova one from the Final Heaven, Final Fantasy VII one. So that change in the original was, got a lot of drums and the fast up-tempo strings, so I was quite apprehensive about arranging that, but I've got the old trusty reverse cymbal and the chime combo, so I think that's okay. I think it worked out well. And so did this track in general, really, mainly thanks to this lady who's just come in here. Her Pitan, she plays as, and she is an incredible violinist. I had worked with her before when she, for want of a better word, rescued my Valse di Fantastica arrangement on the Final Fantasy 15 End of the Road album. So normally when I get stuck, I ask Roxanne the cellist to help out, like she has done on several tracks, even on this album. However, she had already done a very popular arrangement of Fantastica, so I felt like I really needed someone new. I can't actually quite remember how I found out about Pitan. I think it was a recommendation from Rebecca Tripp, fellow video game music arranger Rebecca Tripp. And like with Roxanne, it was just a case of getting exactly what I was after just straight away, which is great because Pitan's Australian, so there's about a 2-hour window when we're both awake, because instant communication can be a bit tricky. But then, by the same token, it means, I can ask her to do something, go to sleep, and then it'll be ready by the time I wake up. Not just for that reason. I'm sure we will be working together again before long. We did a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 cover of Driver Verses, which came out really nicely. So if you are interested, in that cover and many more, please search for Pitan on YouTube, and you'll find more of her VGM covers. And that is the end of the first track. Wow. So we move into Gold Dove, and quite a rarity for this album. At the start of that, you hear the Frozen piano play, dun 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 London, which is kind of a theme from the Homeworld version of Gold Dove. Obviously, this is the Another World version. I didn't really mash up the Another World and Homeworld versions much on this album at all, but honestly, during that intro, I felt that the basic piano needed a bit more behind it. As well as that frozen piano, there's also the organ behind it that you might be able to hear in the background. It's just one of Logic Pro's built-in ones, but I absolutely love it. You can hear it a lot on my arrangements, but it's normally quite low in the mix. So, as you can hear right there, this is the first track of 5, I think. Yes, it's 5 on this album that Roxanne helps out on. As I hinted at earlier, during Scars of Time, she's an absolute pleasure to work with. Like, we must have worked on, I'm going to guess 40, must be around 40 tracks together, and I can't remember ever just like not being amazed by what I got back from her. It's always exactly what I asked for. I mean, we were chatting about doing a whole Chrono Cross album like way back a few years ago, but then like after that I had a track list ready for like a half and half album. Like, so I'd like to kind of go with the two worlds theme of the Chrono Cross. It would just have like half of it would be Cello World, probably wouldn't call it that, and then Piano World. That would be an awful name for those things, but still. Yeah, that kind of got nixed because there would have been some crossover between the Another World and Homeworld themes, and that would have been a bit repetitive, and I wasn't a big fan of that idea. And financially, I'm not sure I could have afforded it, especially straight after doing a whole Peaceful Days record with her. So this little outro bit has the Reducer Rhodes guitar app preset from Omnisphere again. It is one of my favourite sounds ever, and it's normally used during these little tinkly bits. Like with the organ, I try not to overuse it, but as you'll probably hear throughout the duration of this, I inevitably fail quite spectacularly. But if you're going to fail, at least make it fail. At least fail sounding really pretty, right? Oh, it's time for the first segue of the album. I'm a big fan of segues. This one, using just an ocean sound, which then leads into the sailing theme, which is also known as Voyage, I think. But yeah, I love a segue. You got the victory theme leading away from the battle theme on the Octopath album, Hikari and Dearly Beloved on the Kingdom Hearts. I mean, there's loads. But yeah, that ocean sound segue obviously reflects getting into the boat in Gold Dove and then going sailing around the islands to this theme. As my segues go, that's kind of a rarity because it actually connects in the context of the game stories. To be honest, they're normally completely arbitrary or just because two songs are in the same key. But like I mentioned in Gold Dove, where I did mash up the Another World and Homeworld versions a bit, didn't want to in this one because the Homeworld version of Sailing has a really prominent synth line that I don't think really works, and yeah, I don't know how well that would have gone, so it doesn't really feature. So this Sailing is the first track on the album to just be looped with no modifications. I wouldn't say I have a strict rule for if a track should be looped or not, but normally if the first run through comes in at less than 1:30 and I have no idea how to modify a second playthrough, there's the loop point. So if I have no idea how to modify a second playthrough, then I will loop it. Back in 2012, 2013 time, it used to loop everything, so it'd just end up with 4-minute plus tracks. And then for some reason I had the idea that maybe I might end up putting these tributes on CDs sometime, and obviously CDs with a maximum length of 78 minutes, something like that, maybe even 80 on some. So I had to cut them down, because if I was doing 23 tracks, 4 minutes, quick bits of math, what's that, 92 maybe. So yeah, I had to cut them down. But then 7 years later, we're in 2020, and I still haven't put a single album on a CD. But I still like to keep the track times down to around 2 or 3 minutes. And also, not entirely sure if this is common knowledge, but obviously you have to pay license fees to be able to legally cover these songs, and these license fees go up exponentially when the recordings last longer than 5 minutes. So if a first run through is over 2 minutes 30, it definitely wouldn't be looped. Unfortunately, I haven't yet had to make a compromise on an arrangement in order to get it under 5 minutes, and hopefully won't have to in the future. So, moving on to track 4. It's The Girl Who Stole the Stars. So this album is called Parallels, not only as a reference to, the central theme of Chrono Cross with its parallel worlds, etc., but also because of the parallels between this album and my Chrono Trigger album, The End of Time, which came out in 2015, so track 4 on The End of Time is Charlotte's theme, and The Girl Who Stole the Stars is effectively Kid's theme. Right, and this commentary track is not going to go into the details of the Chrono Cross story, but there are some similarities between the characters, we'll just say. And this guitar line that you can hear in the track is the same as the Celeste intro from Charlotte's theme on my Chrono Trigger album. So this frozen piano you can hear, which is replicating the na 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 kind of vocal line. So I've used that a few times before, most notably on the Soul Series album. So, it's kind of cheating, as there is actually a two-handed piano line underneath it. So if you wanted to play this song as it sounds, to play all the piano lines you would definitely need 3 hands. Which is why, I've been reluctant to release sheet music in the past. Another mildly, not interesting fact, but another mildly interesting fact, we'll go with that, about this, is a few years ago I sent an email to Taylor Davis asking if she would like to collaborate with me on a cover of this track. I got a reply from her team saying that they would send my request to her and she'd get back to me. I'm guessing she looked at my request, made some kind of fart noise and then threw it straight in the bin because I didn't hear back from her. Which is fair enough, obviously. She is a lot more popular and tends to work with much more talented people than me. So, I honestly don't mind. I think it still turned out alright. I use solo piano in inverted commas there, because obviously it has the vocal line on a different piano. Right, track 5. It's the Earth Dragon Isle, or Isle of the Earth Dragon. Pretty easy one to translate that one. So the parallels between tracks on this album and the Chrono Trigger album aren't, they're not always story-based like the Charlotte Kid one I just talked about. This shares a parallel between the Undersea Palace theme, which is track 5 on the Trigger album, for musical reasons, namely because they both have a delay-based opening piano line, and that carries on some way through the song. Now, I will admit I am not a Chrono Cross scholar who knows everything there is to know about the lore, but I don't think that the Earth Dragon Isle is related to Undersea Palace in any way, but it is, actually the theme anyway, is somewhat similar to the last Lavos battle theme from Trigger. I think that's what it's called, I don't quite know. But regardless, I didn't cover that on my album, so I couldn't parallel it here. So these swells you can hear in the background are a combination of 2 instruments. One is the strings from Spitfire Audio's Albion Tundra library, and the other is a choir patch from Omnisphere played an octave apart. Now I use those same sounds for the swells on Sea of Eden, which is track 15 I think, later on in the album. Now these strings playing the lead here show up a lot in my arrangements, especially on albums released, I'd say, between 2015 and 2017. I actually think they debuted, for want of a better word, in the Trigger album. I have tried to cut down on fake strings in the last couple of years, but I just love that patch. I think it sounds great. I think the sample library it's from is the LA scoring strings. So since the first run through of Earth Dragon Isle finished at about 140, I decided against looping this, even though Undersea Palace is looped, although that's probably because the loop point is at 129. However, there is actually quite a long time before the fade out begins, but I think mainly that's because I really like the sound of the delayed piano. What's next? Oh, it's this one. Yeah, so this is one of those tracks that, only a few select people know about. So I decided to cover something so esoteric, just to please the die-hard Chrono Cross fans. Obviously that's absolute nonsense. This, along with probably, with Scars of Time and Radical Dreamers, is probably the most popular Chrono Cross track, and that's kind of why I decided to put it in track 6, parallel with Corridors of Time, which you could argue is the standout track from Chrono Trigger. So this was technically the first track recorded for the album, as it was made for mine and Roxanne's Peaceful Days record, which was released all the way back in September 2019. And the piano line throughout the whole song is just really simple, so you could basically say this track is the Roxanne show. Like, when I asked her to help out on a melancholy track, I tend to ask her to like keep it simple, close to the original, to fit in with the rest, the simplicity of the rest of the album. However, as this was for a separate project, she got to kind of let loose on the second playthrough and show off some of her talents. And that's something I'm very conscious of when I'm forcing her to play these really simple melodies. Like, it's just so beneath her. Like, it's hard to strike a balance between wanting to sound, coherent with the rest of the album and also, not playing within yourself. She comes up with all these harmonies herself, which is very helpful, because they will always sound better than anything I can come up with. Like I said, this was recorded for Peaceful Days, but because it was so good, I just decided to keep it the same for this album, And working on a cover of such a popular track like this is always slightly daunting, especially when it has so much nostalgia attached. Something that I don't actually have for Chrono Cross, which I'll talk about later if I run out of things to say about the actual album. But fortunately, it does seem to have been received well on both this album and Peaceful Days, which is great. So this kind of crossfade out that's about to happen has appeared on so many of my arrangements. Like, there's normally a couple per album. I think the other one on this album is the Dragoons theme. It's like where the kind of loud, loud in inverted commas again for one of my albums, kind of fades out, and then the tinkly bit fades in. I've traced it back. The first one I think I did was a cover of the Final Fantasy VII battle theme, Let the Battles Begin, which I uploaded to YouTube on the 20th of May 2012. And there must have been at least 10 different ones since then. Off the top of my head, I can think of A Bell is Tolling from the Secret Mana album, and To Our Surprise from the Kingdom Hearts one also does that. Unlike the Dragoons one, which I think just fades out, this one actually has kind of an end where the note hangs. Right, so next we have Plains of Time, or Fields of Time. So in a soundtrack that, is not really filled with too many overt Chrono Trigger references, just much like the game, to be honest, who, apart from some parts in the story, most of the trigger references are quite subtle, like with Glenn and Frog and all that. So this is basically Chrono Trigger's main theme flipped around, in that, the A part, for want of a better word, the A and the B parts are flipped, so the B plays first and then the A follows that. Now, I actually really like that Chrono Cross is basically a new soundtrack, and not just because it means I can get another album out of it, it's just great to hear more Mitsuda tracks. Like, I've been playing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 recently, and while I know it's not all by him, there are still some great tracks in there. Oh yeah, one thing to note, now I am not a very good pianist by any stretch of the imagination, and I would, I go out of my way to not call myself a pianist. But this left-hand pattern was really no joke. This track is not in the most accommodating of keys. So if you listen in the background, you might be able to hear a chime with a delay. This is almost as common in my arrangements as the guitarette I mentioned in the Goldove track, which incidentally you can also hear in this arrangement, obviously. So every now and then I like to ruin a song by reworking at least half of it to a minor key, like Fisherman's Horizon from the Final Fantasy VIII Definitive Edition album, or the horse race theme from Ocarina. Now, this album doesn't really have one of those, but Plains of Time was definitely on the cards as one that could possibly work, especially as I'd already covered the Chrono Trigger theme on the End of Time, so there wouldn't be that repetitiveness. In the end, a mixture of laziness, talentlessness, laziness, and a feeling that such a revered theme shouldn't be tampered with kind of meant that didn't really happen. As far as Parallels goes, the track 7s and the other one being Wind Scene, slightly more boring one than the previous ones because they're both world map themes, and they're both absolute classics. But what might not be considered a classic is this next track. So yeah, this is the normal battle theme. Now, I can completely understand why the original track doesn't get much love, you know, especially when you compare it to its peers, like the battle tracks that were around at the time of Chrono Cross's release. Like, you have, you know, when absolute bangers like Let the Battles Begin from Final Fantasy VII, Don't Be Afraid from Final Fantasy VIII, when they exist. Actually, you know what, couldn't even throw in the original Chrono Trigger battle theme, you know. When these tracks exist, like Whirlwind, Gale, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really stack up. But you know, you got to admire the sheer difference of it. Like, this is a 9/8 time signature throughout the vast majority of it, a batshit crazy bass line, and those drums. Like, you know, whatever you think of it, you can't deny it that it sounded a lot different to what had come before. But then, over the course of the whole game, you know, and being a Japanese role-playing game, Chrono Cross is quite a long game. You probably hear this track more than any others, so maybe it's not the best track to experiment on, really. Anyway, so I've kind of spent the whole first run through talking about the original rather than this arrangement, but you know, fortunately it loops in its entirety, so I'll chat about it now. Now, this is obviously track 8 to go alongside Battle 1 from Chrono Trigger, and the bass line in this cover has kind of a couple of nods to it, like this one coming up. Dun, 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 sort of thing. So in comes that organ that I chatted about earlier, but this time it's kind of in a much more prominent role. It's definitely not in the background. That kind of reflects how the organ works in the original. Now, I love working on RPG battle theme covers. I just feel like they have the greatest scope for change, as they're normally like up-tempo, quite intense numbers. And so as such, there's at least 2 per album. I'm sure someone will prove me wrong with that, but I think there's at least 2 per album. However, in the first few drafts of the track list for this album, neither this nor the boss theme, Brink of Death, were on it. I just thought they might be a bit too weird to cover. So, you know, to be honest, like, the only battle themes on it would have been Bound by Fate, which is coming up next, the Miguel battle theme, and Sea of Eden, which is played when you battle the dragons, and, you know, neither of which are what you'd call typical boss battle themes. Just typical battle themes. But, you know, in the end, I think both of them, this and Brink of Death, which is towards the end of the album, they turned out pretty well. So here is Bound by Fate, which goes by many names. Oh, that's swell. That's from the Rev library by Output. Now, I absolutely love Output? I love Output sound libraries. I use their Signal one quite a lot on the Chrono Trigger album, because it's I think they call it a pulse engine. And so it's like so it's like tempo synced pulses, and obviously its trigger was a lot to do with time. I thought that would, you know, go really well. And it's still used actually quite a lot today, and on this Chrono Cross album, in fact. They've also got an analog strings library, and that was like a very soft, very lush strings, long tails, long reverbs. I use that a lot on the Soul series album. I think it seems like they're concentrating on their arcade product at the moment, which is, you know, it's not my kind of thing, but I still absolutely love what they've released so far. So, Bound by Fate is kind of at a very profound point in the game, like story-wise, and you know it's serious, like, because when a track like this plays during a boss battle, you know something serious is going down. Like Ares' theme during the Genova Life, not Birth, I think it's Life, Genova Life fight after when she gets killed. And this was actually like a candidate for a track with Roxanne, because I thought maybe her cello would work really well. It was definitely on the Cello World track list, but it was one of the first to go when I decided we're going to stick to about 5 or 6 live strings tracks. So coming up is another segue, like after the Gull-Dove sailing one, is Bound by Fate in 2, if we hear the organ. there it is, Into the Dead Sea, Tower of Gedon. So this is actually, like, this is probably my favourite track from the album, but it's not my favourite track from the OST. Don't get me wrong, it's a really, really good track, but just everything came together. It kind of, it's a weird thing to say, it sounds like an early TPR track, like when I was basically hiding all my piano deficiencies with pads. And I know I still do that, but did it to a lot greater degree back then. Like I said earlier with the Gold Dove Sailing segue, that was kind of a story-based segue. This one, from a story standpoint, is completely wrong way round, because you have to traverse the Dead Sea to get to Chronopolis and work through that, blah blah blah, and you get to the end where Bound by Fate plays for the final boss battle and the profound story points. But like musically, just having that organ just last and then bum bum bum, like, worked better than just the boom boom. So these kind of pads that come in like dun 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 dun, bum 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 bum, that pad there is actually from a cover of the Salt Flats from the Final Fantasy VIII Definitive Edition, which I really like and don't tend to use too much. There's another preset from Omnisphere called Blade Runner Reeds, which is that kind of frozen, slightly detuned sound. Now I use that in combination with the piano quite a lot in more recent arrangements. I kind of like that detuned sound. Also, you've got your signal and rev loops, which make which make appearances throughout the whole album quite a lot. So this has a loop point of 1 minute 40, which kind of goes against the earlier rule. I know, but I just love it so much. I thought, why not we play it again? And so I guess that gives me the opportunity to talk about how every single game I've covered, like every single game soundtrack I've done an album for, I've finished, apart from Octopath, because I wanted to get that done as soon as possible. So I finished, and for some of the early Final Fantasies, just have this nostalgia for it. Played as a kid, and that obviously informs the creation of the covers. Now with Chrono Cross, it didn't come out over here in the UK, so I didn't play it. Like, I would have been 11 when it came out, and so I'd have been like right in my it would have been in my wheelhouse as well. PS1 JRPG, but it never actually came out over here, and I was never really into emulation. So over the past 5 years or so I've tried to pick it up and try to play it, but I never got into it until last year, where I played it on the Vita, everyone's favourite console. So hopefully, like, it's still an album worth listening to, even though I myself don't have nostalgia for it. Right, so here we have track 11, it's The Frozen Flame, and it starts with the cello, which is, quite rare. Like, I've done, like I said, about 40 odd tracks with Roxanne. Very few of them have actually started with the cello. I kind of like, whenever I send her an arrangement, it always has like a pad to count in, so there'll be a bar of to count her in, sort of thing. So I think if we could pick a track, a track could be written, let's say, that's perfect for us to play, it's got to be this one. Like, actually, Roxanne picked it out very early on, probably about 2017, maybe 2018, when we were talking about doing Chrono Cross collaborations. She picked it out. She sent me the YouTube link, like, right, we need to play this. I'm like, okay, cool, and we did. Here it is. So the harp, that kind of harp in the background, the delayed harp is a huge part of the original, how the original sounds. And I kind of toyed with the idea of using the piano for it, but there's already the right hand parts, like and does stuff like that. So I ended up using a heavily processed harp sound with loads of delay from the Miroslav Philharmonic Library, which is quite a nice orchestral library. I actually think that, along with string sections, I think harps are one of the hardest instruments to kind of replicate in that way. So that's why I added a lot of reverb and a lot of delay to make it kind of sound a bit different. If you actually want to hear a harpless arrangement of the Frozen Flame, I encourage you to check out I nearly said a cover. It's definitely not a cover, an arrangement by Mitster and the Millennial Fair guys, which might be here, I don't actually know who they are. But it's on the Faraway Times official arrangement, which you can definitely find on Spotify. It must be on YouTube somewhere. Anyway, we're on the second playthrough now, where the loop point is exactly 1 minute 30, but my parts are looped, but Roxanne insisted on playing through again. And now, normally on the second playthrough, she tends to, let a little loose, give it a bit more variation. Like, see our cover of Pandemonium from the Memories of Fantasy album, for an example of that. But here, she actually keeps it, quite similar. She's got a few ornaments here and there, but, it's quite cool. I like it when she plays stuff a bit different, but also, I'm always going to like it when she keeps it simple. So during this part in the original, there's like a plucked part, and I didn't get Rox to do that. I'm not, a big fan of having the pizzicatos while she's already playing. So I tried to use chimes, but now in hindsight, they're way too quiet. Should have been made louder. And now there's an actual endpoint for a loop track, which is quite unusual in my arrangements. No segue though. Alright, so move on to The Departed Ones, track 12. Now, the original of this is such a nice track. I know it has several different names. Some of those are really weird. Like, I remember seeing, Leaving the Body, I think is one, which I'm sure when you translate the Japanese is a very literal translation that still works. But The Departed Ones is perfect for this. I think it only plays once during the whole game. I haven't done a lot of the side stuff or any New Game Plus stuff. But so I think it only plays during the scene in Termina when you're with Glenn and the bellflower at Dario's grave, etc. This and the Arnie Homeworld cover are the only piano only tracks I released on YouTube. All the others had the cello or violin in, Fossil Valley, Shore Dreams, blah blah blah, Scars of Time, so I think people, at least YouTube subscribers, might have thought there would be more live strings, so I can only apologise for the disappointment when they discovered that they'd already heard all of them, I think, apart from Radical Dreamers. So I only figured this out while arranging both of the tracks very close to one another, but this is basically its own melancholy tribute to the Dragoons theme, which is track 16, which makes perfect sense when you think about it in story context. So when I did that, I thought, if this is track 12, then maybe Dragoons could be track 21, flip the numbers, like a parallel in the same album. And then I saw that track 21 on the End of Time was called Brink of Time, so then Brink of Death would work much better as a parallel because it's between the two albums. However, I did forget to remove the Departed Ones from track 12, so now, it's actually quite close to Dragoons, which is a complete oversight, but oh well. So you can hear there there's a bass used. It's used a lot more in this album, as the bass is quite common throughout the original. But during this outro, there's an electric guitar very faint that you can hear. Now, while it's not part of a segue per se, it is kind of used in the next track, which is Hydra Marshes. Now, I think it's a very heavily processed electric guitar. There you can just about hear it. I think it's Guitar Rig 5. It's part of Contact's Ultimate 8 or whatever I got about 5 years ago. I only know it's called Hand in Hand because I named it after Hand in Hand, the battle theme from Traverse Town in Kingdom Hearts, which is where I first played it on. So now, anyway, Hydra Marshes. Bit of an unusual one, this. So I think I mentioned before when I was figuring out what to put on this album, actually, I'll go through my process. Basically, before I start work on the album proper recording, I'll listen to the soundtrack in full at least once a day for about a month, and then gradually cut tracks that I don't think would work and then note down the tracks that I think will, and then keep, you know, a list of maybes just in case the tracks I want to do don't quite work out. Now, Hydro Marshes wasn't even on the first draft of tracks. Not even on the maybes. I just kind of really liked that melody of the third part. Because the thing is, if I cut a song, so to speak, like, I'm not going to hear it again until I hear it while playing through the game. And yeah, just hearing that when I played the game, I thought, oh, I can actually do this. So it, I had a go and it made it on the album. So you can hear that signal pulse there you could hear in the background. That's from the output signal library that I was talking about earlier. It's actually quite bassy in this one as well, which is, especially in the first part, it's quite unusual. So yeah, put it as at track 13 to be a parallel with Silent Light, because it's kind of a dungeon theme. Like, I remember that being the dungeon theme, like when you're in the castle in Chrono Trigger. Like, it could be Fossil Valley, but that is at track 19 for a different reason that I will talk about then. So at the end of the song, on the original, it's got kind of this sound, and that was my terrible attempt at trying to replicate it. Like, it was the kind of sound that I think would be quite incongruous in this album. Like, you'd kind of be put out of, like, if you're using it to study, if a big happened, you'd be like, what the hell was that? So I kept it kind of subtle. Also, I wasn't really sure how to make it. Anyway, we're on to Arnie Village, or just Arnie actually, the homeworld version. And I don't know, what can I say? It's just such a really nice song, isn't it? I don't know if any theme in Chrono Cross like portrays its play, like any village theme, any place theme kind of portrays what it's trying to portray quite as well as Arnie does. Like, if you don't count Shore of Dreams, which was recorded for a different album, this was the first track recorded. It was kind of recorded first because, like I've said before, I was I hadn't played it before. I was playing through the game as I was recording, and obviously, for those who don't know, you turn up in this village. Well, you say turn up, you live in this village and you visit it very early on. So I thought I'd record it early on as I was playing it. So yeah, this was recorded before Peaceful Days, the last album, came out. It was all recorded. Like, the Peaceful Days was all recorded. But there's a good, I'd say, for those who don't know the licensing process, it can take quite a while. So there's about 3 to 4 weeks where the album has to be licensed and then distributed. So during that time, I thought, I'll start the new album. And speaking of Peaceful Days, this is, I guess it's parallel, because, well, basically it's the first town theme. That's quite a simple one. So when I put this on YouTube, I did something I don't tend to do, which is put up a video of me playing along with it effectively. I wasn't playing it live, it was the recorded version, but I was playing along with it. And and I had the Synthesia piano down the bottom showing which notes I played. I don't tend to do it because, well, one, my arrangements are so simple, they're not much to look at, and two, I'm not much to look at. I am a man in his 30s with crab eyes and glasses and a terrible beard, and I just don't think people would care how it's played. However, if you want to play it, it is one of the few arrangements that has legally available sheet music of my arrangement online if you search for it. So here is Sea of Eden, which is also known as Garden of God, I think. Actually, I should probably talk a bit about track names. So before about June last year, I think it was, if you were living in the West and you wanted to get the soundtrack, you could buy it from an American place or a British place, but it would have to have been imported from Japan first. So therefore, all the track names would be in Japanese, and the only English you could get would be the fan translations. Whereas in June, it might not have been June, I'm trying to think, it was around then, they announced the Revival soundtrack, and that came with the official English translations, which I've used for my tracks. But anyway, about Sea of Eden. So I would never release something I didn't like, but this is probably the least like I wanted one of the arrangements to sound, at least on this album. Like, I have this the sound in my head. There's going to be lots of delays, and there's going to be kind of this dreamlike atmosphere. Maybe I just don't have the talent to pull it off. Maybe piano just doesn't suit that kind of thing, and maybe it's a bit of both. It probably is. So it actually was gonna be the second track on the album instead of Gold Dove and Sailing combo, because you have Scars of Time at the start, like with the intro video, and then once that's over, you go to the title screen and the underwater bit and stuff, and Sea of Eden's playing. But I just, I didn't think it was good enough to be second. I didn't want people who didn't know my stuff to start listening to the album and then get to track 2 and be like, maybe this isn't what I'm after, sort of thing. But yeah, so it got pushed down to track 15. Like, I still like it. I would never put out something I thought was rubbish. But yeah, maybe not good enough for track 2. So while we're on the loop, I'll on the second playthrough, I can talk about why it took such a long time to start work on the Chrono Cross album, because it'd been requested, like I said, from way back when, but I only started last September. And that was because it kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier with the soundtrack being imported. Like, you could only, I don't know if you know this, it's common knowledge or anything, but you can only legally cover a song that's been released in North America. And while you could buy it in North America, it would have been from a Japanese import. Now, since this Revival soundtrack came out, it's come out on iTunes and Spotify, etc. So I've been able to cover it. And because, I kind of do this for a living, so I didn't want to waste my time by working on something that was just going to get rejected. So yeah, that's why it took such a long time to start. Right, anyway, Dragoons. Trying to think, would this be the biggest change on the album between the original and this? No, it's not. No, I've just remembered one that's coming later. I'll talk about that when it comes up. But anyway, I like covering these kind of militaristic is not the right word. What am I thinking? Like a military like it's got the snares like like, you know what I mean? Because like Sid's theme from Final Fantasy VII. That's one of my favourite tracks, just like the original, full stop. But my version of that with Roxanne, I don't have a list of my favourite covers. That would be really weird. But if I were to make one, that would definitely be in the top 5. I think I like them so much because like the battle themes, they just give you a large scope of a large creativity scope. Just a lot to work with, especially when you're doing it in my style. To slow it down, add those pads and stuff. It's probably a weird thing to say, but I really like the left hand in this arrangement. I don't know why. I think it's because it's constantly moving. It's quite constant throughout the whole song. Now earlier I mentioned I had a list of tracks I was going to do when I listened to the soundtrack for the first few times, and also a maybe column. And this was in the maybe column, I seem to remember. I'm not entirely sure why, because it was quite obvious it would be alright in my style. I think it was just poor judgment from me, to be honest. So this is quite a rarity, in that this part in the original is quite quiet. It's just kind of like the it might be an oboe sound, I think, with just with the snare just kind of gently drumming in the background. But it's actually the reverse. Like my version here is quite loud, and it's normally completely the other way around. Never normally happens. So here is where it goes back to the section A, but it's not looped because it's a lot louder. This originally faded out during this last chorus. Just it would probably start fading out about now. But then I kept that fade out, but changed it to the crossfade. One of my, as we talked about, Unsure Dreams, one of my favourite things to do. And the tinkly piano is about to hear the tinkly piano, or have I come in too early? There it is. So that's now 2 for the album. But unlike Shore Dreams, where it kind of stops, hangs on that last note, this just fades out again with the organ. Right, what is it, track 17 now? Christ. So this is Mabule, and I guess this is also the perfect time to talk about pronunciations. So I've called it that because I feel like it seems most similar to the Japanese, the katakana reading of it, but you know, people are going to say Marbule, Marbule, yeah, you know, so I don't think it really matters, does it? That's the joy of not having a voice track. But anyway, back to the music. It was kind of a toss-up between covering the home world or the Another World version. I did the Another World because the home world has this ridiculous sounding lead, like and I just thought so using a piano would sound quite different to that. But it also has a lot of melodies kind of in the same, which would be in the same register if I were to transpose it, I guess you'd say, to the piano. Like there's a flute one that goes with that lead, and you know, that stuff's always quite tricky to do unless you just put multiple pianos in, in which case it can get a bit busy. So basically what I'm saying is I went with a lazier option by covering the Another World. So this, so Mabule is kind of, the theme is very central to the whole like Magical Dreamers thing, Nicky's rock band in the game. And I, before playing the game or really understanding it, used to get it confused with Radical Dreamers, which is such a revered song that's talked about by just, you know, VGM enthusiasts rather than Chrono Cross fans. And I would hear Magical Dreamers and be like, oh yeah, it's alright, but I don't get why it's so, you know, so talked about. And I know it's because I'm an idiot and I got the completely wrong track. Anyway, while we're on the loop of this track, I should probably a good opportunity to talk about the artwork, the cover art, which is done by Abby Scott, who I've worked with for, at the time of recording, 5 years. The first album cover she did for me was The Last of Us, All Gone, in January 2015, the album that no one has listened to. And she's done every like new album since, like not a definitive edition, like a brand new album. She's worked on every one for me, and she's always amazing. But we wanted parallels not just with the music, but with the art. So in The End of Time, you've got the blue background with the pocket watch and space dust coming out the crack, like orange, like red-orange space dust. So in this one, we've got the red-orange background and the broken clock. But coming out for the parallels is blue water, obviously because of the, you know, the intro, like where Sea of Eden would play, like the title screen is what I mean. It's all underwater, and there's a lot of water in Chrono Cross with the sailing and all the islands and stuff. So we thought that would be nice parallels. It's like, what would it look like in my head? And it came out pretty similar. She's an incredible artist, and I look forward to working with her a lot more this year. So here is Fleeting Thoughts, and I don't know, it's probably the most simple song on this album, and possibly on the original soundtrack as well, like excluding like all the little sleep bits and stuff, like the most simple full song. But anyway, so I did a cover of Mount Pyre, or Death Volcano or something is the other translation. And it was, the reason why is because Mount Pyre was on the to-do list, and whereas Fleeting Thoughts was on the maybe. However, whether it's because the source material didn't fit my style or whether I'm just not very good, again, probably a bit of both, Mount Pyre did not sound very good because it has that sound, and maybe that didn't work very well. So this got promoted, and I'm glad it did because it's a really nice tune. I considered getting Roxanne to play like what I think might be a clarinet part. It's what's being played on the piano now, but it is just so simple. It's like 8 notes or something. So I thought it would be a waste of her time, and a waste of my money. Like I didn't want to hire her just to play something really boring. I actually, if you want to check out more developed, a lot longer cover, then please do check out Gentle Love, the Lullaby, VGM Lullaby Legends, Gentle Love's cover on one of their Lullaby albums. I think it's not called that, let me check what it's called. yeah, it's called Singing Emotion rather than Fleeting Thoughts. So the main, like one of the main changes to this is quite a similar cover. However, the A section, when I do an arrangement, if the A section's quiet, I will tend to play it louder on the loop. This time I've done it on both, where the A section was quiet and the B section was loud. The A section was loud, and this, as you can hear, the B is quiet. Now, during these quiet, in inverted commas, sections, it's not ever just piano. There's always a lot going on behind it. I think this has got like an ambient piano going got the organ obviously, and there's a Celeste with delay on it, but also there's an electric piano from Spitfire Audio's Labs, which is a kind of their free wing. They kind of give away free VSTs and sound libraries, and I encourage anyone who wants to create music to check those out, because there's some really good things you can pick up for no money whatsoever. Anyway, run out of breath. Here we go, Fossil Valley, track 19. So this is my favourite track from the original soundtrack. This is my favourite original track from Chrono Cross. It's not my favourite cover from the album. I still really like it. Here you can hear I'm cheating again. So I've got the bass, got the left hand going dun, 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 and then frozen piano going dun, 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 while the right hand is playing the melody. Oh, speaking of playing the melody, here's Roxanne again. So I thought she was needed for this one. Like, although it's a similar kind of number of bars that she'd be playing to this one and the Fleeting Thoughts, which I didn't need her on, I thought, maybe because I just really like this track, I just kind of wanted Roxanne to, push it up another level. So she recorded one of these, this melody, one run through of this melody, and I put it on YouTube, just looped, and then within like 10 minutes she messaged me being like, oh, I didn't know you were going to loop it. If I'd known that, I would have done a second playthrough. And so she duly did a second playthrough, even though, she didn't have to. But that's Roxanne. She's very much a pro. So earlier in the Hydra Marshes track, I mentioned that it's on 13 for the dungeon theme, parallel with Silent Light from the Trigger. So this is also a dungeon theme in Chrono Cross, but this is paralleled with on track 19, which is Uematsu's Sealed Door from the End of Time, and that's because they're both in 5/8 time. Like this has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Sealed Door is like dun 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 dun, no dun 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 dun. So yeah, so I thought we'd go for the lesser seen time signature parallel. Oh my god, why are you still listening to this? This is incredibly boring. Anyway, speaking of boring and being put to sleep, it's I've been waiting for this one. It's Zelbas. Now this is the most changed from the original on the album. If you're not familiar with the original, and I don't blame you if you're not, please do check it out. It's just, if anything, just to hear how different they sound. What won't surprise you is that this was not on my original list, or even the maybes. So there's an odd reason why I decided to do it. If you might have heard of a online sheet music shop service called Sheet Music Plus. Now behind the scenes they have a licensing service where they have various released songs that you can legally license for sheet music for, and you get an absolute pittance if you do sell it, but that's another story for that's another point for another time. And when I started doing the Chrono Cross album, they're only like a third to a half, and we'll say 3/5. No, we won't. We'll say 2/5 of the Chrono Cross soundtrack was licensable for sheet music. And I had a grand idea that I was going to do all this sheet music, and Zelbas was one of them. And I was like, what? Why would you do that? It's such a weird song. And I thought, well, at least, maybe not criticize it without giving it a go. And then I think it turned out really quite nicely. I thought about calling it Zelbas, like 3 Zs, sorry, or 3 Zs for my international listeners, just to signify sleep. But I'm not a big fan of changing the names from the original, unless it's a complete mistake, like Daguerreo the Hermit's Library, which has an extra R in. For some reason, it's a bad typo. And I did a piano reductions album, so I reduced all the names of the tracks to kind of go with that theme. Also, like, I don't know why I'd be worried, you know, to be honest, if they were searching for the original, they probably wouldn't like what they heard, so maybe I should have called it a different name. Oh well. Anyway, Brink of Death, track 21. So, I guess this is the first track heard in the game proper, like, after you get through the title screen and all that. It's also the boss theme. So it's the first track that's heard in the game, but it was definitely one of the last tracks to be recorded for this album. Even though it was one of the first to be requested, I think I put a Facebook post up being like, oh, you guys want Chrono Cross, what kind of tracks would you like to hear? And this guy's like, I want to hear the boss theme. And I was like, not sure how that would work. I didn't really think too much of it, it didn't make any of my lists. Until I ended up playing the game, and I was like, and also, like, I don't think any of my albums don't have a boss theme in, so got to keep up the tradition, right? So this left-hand line kind of reminds me of Space Divest by Dream Theater. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that song. But also, it's the closest I'm ever going to get to them. So, as well in this part, you can hear the strings that I mentioned in the Earth Dragon Isle, like the track 5 track. Now, whenever strings have to take the lead, these are always the ones that appear. No matter how realistic they sound, I don't care. I really like them. Oh, here we go. Is this a big swell? Yeah, so I call that the cliff. It's appeared in many, well, maybe many stretching it, but quite a few of my arrangements. I think probably the most notable off the top of my head is definitely Genova from The Final Heaven, and probably Kingdom Trial from, maybe I should have made that a parallel with that. Oh, but then I'd lose the Brink of Death. But then, Kingdom Trial, what, track 16, so it would have got Dragoons at there. Anyway, so I'm just talking to myself now. Anyway, well, I did talk over the use of the Chrono theme, like just to kind of just lead it back into the loop. Now, like in the Kingdom Hearts album, I used the Gummy Ship theme all the time, but I didn't really tend to borrow many themes in this album. Oh, we're nearly there. Right, so this is The Bend of Time, track 22. First thing to talk about is how beautiful the area this track plays. I don't know what it's called. Is it Sprig's Dimension? Whatever it's called. Such an incredible look to it. Like I played this, like I said, for the first time last year. I played this for the first time in 2019, and it still kind of blew my mind. So I can only imagine what people must have thought it was like when it came out 20 years ago. So this arrangement, very, very simple. It's basically just piano and organ. And I still think it's a nice piece, but his main job is just to lead into Radical Dreamers, the last track. As such is the shortest track on the album, and one of the shortest tracks I've ever arranged, like if you don't count intro tracks like Presentiment and stuff like that. Alfin from the Octopath album is probably up there or down there. But I only cut that short because I wanted to make the total album track 44 minutes and 44 seconds, so it'd be 8/8, which is stupid. Anyway, if you want to hear an incredible piano performance of an arrangement of this track, I highly recommend checking out Cara Compareto's Dimension Breach. I think she makes it sound like she's an incredible pianist. Her and Ruby, Purple Shala, are two of the finest VGM pianists on YouTube. But yeah, she makes it sound like a genuine 20th century classical number. It's fantastic. And it also speaks to the strength of the original composition. But here we go, Segway City to Radical Dreamers. And it's come to this. This is the last track on Parallels, it's the last track on the OST, so it couldn't really go anywhere else. Much like Scars of Time, which had to go at the start, this had to go at the end. So I hired a Japanese singer to sing on this, and while it was an incredible performance and it was perfect, it's exactly what I asked for, I decided not to go with her in the end, obviously, as you're about to hear, as Roxanne comes in. instead of the vocal line. I just thought that it needs to be different. Like, this is such a revered song. It's such a well-loved song for quite a well-loved game that, you know, finishes it off. It's the credits theme. And why would I just like make a worse version of what's out there already? Like, the singer's vocals, you know, weren't a million miles away from Mitose's. Like, and they could have been exactly as good as hers, but what you'd have is my shitty piano backing it up. So, you know, there'd really be no point. Like, I know, like, my arrangements are never, ever going to be better than the originals. I will never say they are. You know, like I said earlier, I'm not a pianist. I can't create these incredible sweeping piano lines. You know, I know what I can do, so that's why I do it. You know, it's all simple, you know, slowed down, easy to play, quite easy to play melodic lines. So I can't make it special in that way. So, you know, I can't make it better like that. I'll need to make it different. And, you know, getting a Japanese singer singing the Japanese lyrics like there is in the original is not different. So fortunately, Roxanne was free, and she, well, you know, this is a special song, like I said, so it needs to be elevated, and as she is wont to do in these situations, she rescued it. Rescued it. Like, I've been thinking about doing some Nier Automata and Replicant Gestalt covers. Like, I know Emmy Evans, one of the absolutely incredible singers who worked on the Nier Automata soundtrack. I know she has worked with some of my peers on truly beautiful tracks, but like, even if she for some reason agreed to work with me on a Nier project, like, her beautiful vocals would just have my awful piano behind it, like completely shitty piano, like alongside these beautiful haunting vocals. And like, so it would neither be better nor different. It would, you know, it would be the same but worse. Yeah, the same but worse. The TPR story. And yeah, it's kind of a nice way to finish off collaborating with Roxanne. For the time being, at least, we don't have any other projects in the pipeline. She's like, our Peaceful Days album is possibly my favourite one I've ever done. And, you know, she helped out on this and did a really great job, especially on this track and the 4 other ones. Like, with this bit here, like, replacing the R's. It just sounds so good. I'm so happy with how it came together. Especially as, I don't know, if you don't follow me on Facebook, if you want to, please do. It's always nice to have new fans. But if you don't follow me on Facebook, you won't know that 2020 is going to be my last year working on video game music cover projects. So it's a good thing. I'm glad. Put it this way: I'm glad to have started off the last year with this album. I think it sounds great. Obviously, that speaks more to the quality of the source material than what I've done to it. But I think it's a good way to start, and honestly, really looking forward to working on 3 or 4 more before the year's out, before, you know, giving it a rest and maybe working on some original things and other non-musical projects. Anyway, and we're coming to the end now, so thank you very much, and I'm so sorry if you're still here. God, that's a bit of a slog. But thank you if you have listened all the way through. It truly means the world, and I hope you learn at least, you know, a tiny sliver of interesting information. Anyway, thank you very much, and yeah, goodbye.